It was late November when I started the overnight shift as a station monitor at the city's second deepest subway hub, the Franklin Street Terminal. For most people, that name doesn't mean much, but for anyone who's worked underground, they'll tell you it's a maze. Layers of concrete, cold air vents that hum constantly, and long-abandoned access tunnels from when the city planned to expand but never did. That's what Franklin is, a place full of forgotten intentions and weird drafts that smell like rusted pipe water and wet dust. I was assigned to the night shift after one of the regular guys, Alan, I think his name was, stopped showing up. No call, no resignation, just gone. They told me he was kind of a loner anyway. Liked working in silence and keeping to himself, but when I saw the empty locker with his name still scratched into the plastic, something about it gave me this odd little chill. That, and the fact that a couple of his work shirts were still hanging inside, neatly folded. Anyway, I didn't think too much of it at first. I just needed the money. The overnight shift was simple enough. Monitor the surveillance feed, do an hourly sweep of the lower platforms, and check the East Side Tunnel gate before sign-off. That last part, the East Side Tunnel, that's where things started to feel off. My first couple of shifts were uneventful. The place was nearly dead after midnight, especially during the week. Trains stopped running by 1:30 a.m., and the only people down there afterward were the late-night cleaning crew and me. The office they gave me was this small, windowless room behind the main platform, fluorescent lighting overhead, a tiny desk, and 3 monitors hooked up to ancient cameras that flickered between feeds like they were struggling to breathe. Most of the cameras worked fine, except one, CAM9. The label below it just said Access Corridor C, Sublevel 3. I didn't even know there was a Sublevel 3. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. The screen would blink, go black, then show a blurry image of a hallway that looked entirely unlike any part of the station I'd seen. Narrow, dim, with a single maintenance door at the far end. Every time it cut in, I noticed the same thing. The door was slightly more open than before. I told my supervisor. He laughed, said those feeds haven't worked in years, and the system probably had leftover signal bleeding from somewhere else. Still, he promised to put in a ticket for IT to take a look. He never did, so I kept watching Cam 9, and every night, the door in that image opened just a little bit more. After about a week, my curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the master schematics for the terminal from the dusty drawer beneath the desk. Big mistake. According to the blueprints, there was no sublevel 3. There was a sublevel 2, used for equipment storage and some maintenance walkways. But after that, it just showed a concrete slab that freaked me out a little, but not enough to stop me from digging. On my 5th night, I waited until after 3 a.m. when I knew the cleaning crew had gone, and decided to take a little detour on my sweep, just to see. I started on sublevel 2, took the freight elevator down, and stepped into the kind of darkness that feels old. Like the absence of light wasn't just from the power being cut. It felt intentional, forgotten. But most of the corridor was industrial and boring. Cement walls, rusted pipes, old signage covered in black mold, until I found a corner that wasn't on the blueprint. A staircase, leading down. I should have turned back, but I didn't. I descended the stairs slowly, flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. The air grew cold and damp, and the hum of distant machinery from above vanished completely at the bottom. I found a long hallway, just like the one in Cam 9. It looked exactly the same. Same narrow walls, same flickering light, same maintenance door at the far end. Only now, I could see it with my own eyes. I walked up to it. Every step felt heavy, like gravity was stronger down there. My ears felt full, like I'd gone to deep underground, like the air pressure was wrong. I reached the door. There was no handle. Just a vertical slit down the center where 2 steel panels met. The only feature was a small red circle painted above where a knob should be. It wasn't fresh. The paint had aged, flaked a little, but it was precise. I stood there for a long moment, trying to hear anything on the other side. That's when I felt it. A breeze, coming from the gap in the door. Cold, sharp, breathing. I left fast. The next day Cam 9 didn't flicker. It just stayed on. The feed was clearer than ever. And that door, it was now wide open, pitch black beyond it. I told my supervisor again. This time, he got weirdly quiet. Asked me if I'd gone down to sublevel 2. When I said yes, he stared at me for a few seconds too long, then said, "You shouldn't go there again." Seriously. I asked him why. He just said, "That area's not in use." not in use. But someone kept opening that door. That night, I stayed in the office, eyes glued to cam 9. At 2:46 a.m., the feed glitched once, a flash of static, and for a brief moment, there was something standing in the doorway. Tall, too tall, its body blended with the dark, but its eyes, if that's what they were, reflected the camera. Not with red like animals do, but silver, like mirrors. Then it was gone. The door closed halfway again. I didn't sleep that day. 3 days later, cam 9 went black permanently. Just a blue screen that said no signal, but the hallway, the door. I kept seeing it in my head. Even while I was walking the upper platforms, I'd sometimes glance at a tunnel entrance and see it out of the corner of my eye. I requested a transfer. HR said they'd process it in a week. I didn't have a week. On what would become my last shift. The door in cam 9 appeared one last time. Just a still image. Not live video. No timestamp. Just frozen. The door was wide open. Inside, a hallway lined with pipes, stretching back into pitch black. Except this time, something was different. A work shirt was hanging from the edge of the door. One of the uniforms we wear, with a name tag barely visible. Alan. That was enough. I left the post without clocking out, and never returned. HR called. I ignored it. My paycheck was docked for abandoning shift. I didn't care. But sometimes, when I'm on a subway platform now, even in a different city, I'll catch a glimpse of a hallway that shouldn't be there. And I swear, for just a moment, I can feel that breeze again. Cold. Breathing. I used to work nights cleaning subway cars at a depot just outside the city, near the end of the Green Line. Most people don't think about where the trains go when they're not in use, how they're emptied, cleaned, and stored until the next day. For a while, it was just a quiet, solitary job, peaceful even. But what happened one January night in 2019 still plays in my head more often than I'd like to admit. I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. But when I told someone, they told me I must have fallen asleep on the job. It started like every other shift. I clocked in at 11:02 p.m. and met my partner Rico by the locker room. He always had a can of Red Bull in one hand and his earbuds in the other. We'd joke around a bit, then grab our supply trash bags, a cart with disinfectants, brooms, mops, and that sour-smelling cleaner the transit authority insisted we use. Our assignment that night was routine: clean for incoming trains from the last outbound runs and then hit the final Cartha, one that always rolled in close to 2:15 a.m., just before the track gates closed. The night was moving quickly. Rico took the second and third cars. I handled the first and fourth. We barely spoke, both of us lost in our music or podcasts. It wasn't until that final train pulled in that something felt wrong. I watched it roll in from the far end of the service tunnel. The lights inside were flickering more than usual. Not the usual random fluorescent stutter, but in a rhythmic way. 2 flickers, a pause, then another 2, like it was trying to blink out some kind of code. I didn't say anything to Rico. He was already peeling off toward the other side of the depot, probably rushing to finish and go home. I envied him in that moment. I waited for the doors to unlatch with that sharp hiss of decompressing air. The lights in the train pulsed once more, then silence. Total silence. The kind that presses on your ears. That's when I noticed something else. The train didn't sound powered. Normally, even when parked, there's a subtle hum, a background whine from the auxiliary systems, but this one was dead quiet. Still, I had a job to do. I stepped into the first car, my boots echoing on the grimy floor tiles. The air was colder than it should have been. Much colder. I wiped my glove along the window and noticed condensation. The inside, that wasn't normal. The car looked mostly empty, except for one man sitting at the far end. He was hunched forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed like he was asleep. I hesitated. Sometimes stragglers missed the announcements or straight up refused to leave. It wasn't my job to force them off, but we were supposed to call security if someone refused to move after warning. I cleared my throat and walked down the aisle. "Sir, this train's out of service. You'll need to disembark." No response. I got closer. He didn't flinch, didn't look up. He was wearing a heavy black coat, thick gray slacks, and leather gloves. The oddest thing was the hat, one of those wide-brimmed old-style fedoras you'd see in a 1940s noir film. "Sir," I repeated. His breathing was steady, audible even, almost too audible, like he was drawing air through a throat thick with fluid. Then he moved, not a twitch, not a jerk. He stood, slow and deliberate, like he'd just heard his name. After hours of silence, his head still hung down. His arms stayed limp at his sides, and then, without looking at me, he walked past me and out of the car. I froze. Moment he passed, I felt like I'd walked through a cold mist. It was like the air shifted, like a pressure dropped suddenly. I turned to watch him exit, but he was already gone. Not walking, just gone. When I stepped back out onto the platform, I looked left, then right, empty. The depot was silent except for the faint shuffle of Rico somewhere in the next car. Then I saw it. The same man was back in the car, sitting in the exact same seat. I didn't move, I just stared. My stomach twisted in a way I can't describe. My hands were clammy inside my gloves. I blinked once, twice. Still there, head bowed, hat tilted just the same. I stepped back onto the train. It was colder than before. The windows fogged deeper. Every surface felt slightly damp. I walked toward the figure again, now less certain, my grip tightening on the handle of the mop. Hey, I shouted this time, trying to drown out my own heartbeat. You need to leave. This is the end of the line. The figure didn't move. Then came the sound. It wasn't from him. It came from the intercom above me. A burst of static. Then, do not follow him. I stared up in disbelief. The intercom system had been deactivated. We unplug it before we clean. But that voice, it was a whisper. A deep, gravelly whisper. Male. Sharp and short, like someone delivering a warning and hanging up. Then, the lights flickered again twice, in rhythm, and all of them cut out. The car went pitch black. In that total darkness, I heard movement, not footsteps, something like cloth dragging across seats, and then breathing. Closer this time, wet and deliberate. When the emergency backup light flicked on just one faint red bulb above the exit, the car was empty. I backed out slowly. My heart was hammering now. I dropped the mop that Rico met me outside, confused. He said he'd seen someone exit the train on the other side too. Same guy, same coat, same slow walk. We checked the depot footage the next day. Here's where it gets worse. The security feed showed the train pulling in. It showed me entering. It showed Rico doing his sweep on the other side. But the man there was no one. Not entering, not leaving, not sitting, nothing. And yet I saw him, twice. I tried to let it go, told myself maybe it was exhaustion, stress, or sleepwalking. I didn't tell the higher-ups, didn't want to be benched or worse, sent for a psych evaluation. But last week, almost 5 years later, I was in the break room when a new GIF-fresh hire named Marco came in, pale as a ghost. Said he'd just seen someone on the last train. A man in a black coat, fedora, gloves, didn't speak, walked off the train, then was back on the train again. When he turned around, Marco asked me, "You ever seen anything weird like that?" All I could do was nod. And that night, for the first time in years, I took the early shift. I don't ride the last train anymore. I used to be a transit inspector for the city's subway system, a job that most people assumed was either boring or dangerous, depending on what movies they'd seen. In truth, it was mostly paperwork and walking tunnels with a flashlight, reporting leaks, debris, or malfunctions. But there was always an unspoken understanding among longtime workers that some things weren't supposed to be found, and some stations shouldn't be explored past what was necessary. One of those places was Platform 13 of the Warrenton line. On paper, Platform 13 didn't even exist anymore. It had been officially shut down in 1979 after a derailment and subsequent fire that left 6 people dead and the underground structure unsafe for regular use. The other platforms were reinforced and reopened, but 13 was sealed. Or, it was supposed to be. I first noticed something was wrong during a routine inspection. In early 2022, there had been an uptick in unauthorized tunnel activity reports of someone walking the tracks between Warrenton Central and Alderbrook Station. Security footage from the newer platforms showed occasional flickers in the corner of frame, movement just beyond the edge of visibility, like a person vanishing into the walls. Most chalked it up to rats, maintenance, reflections, or compression glitches in the footage. But the strange thing was the timestamps. Every single one happened at 2:13 a.m. It was always the same frame camera, 2 of the northbound platform at Warrenton Central. The feed would briefly distort, like static warping the signal, then return to normal. No figure ever appeared clearly. just a faint suggestion of movement. And always, always at that exact time, I was curious but not alarmed. At least, not until I was assigned a night inspection shift for an unrelated repair issue on the Warrenton line. My supervisor handed me a flashlight, a walkie, and a checklist. The repair crew was running late, and the tunnel near Platform 13 had experienced some electrical irregularities. Just log the outage and wait for the crew, he said casually. Don't wander too deep. Too deep was an odd way to put it, considering we weren't spelunking a cave. I arrived at the service entrance just before 1:30 a.m. The old corridor that led to the disused platform was humid, stale, and filled with the stench of rust and mildew. My boots echoed on the tile as I descended the narrow stairwell. Most of the old signage had been stripped or faded into illegibility, but the 13 on the wall near the gate was unmistakable. The padlock securing the rusted metal grate had been snapped clean open. That gave me pause. The bolt hadn't been cut. It had simply snapped, like someone or something had applied immense, precise pressure. That kind of break didn't happen from age or weather. And the lock wasn't rusted. It was relatively new. I radioed it in, but got nothing but static. No confirmation, no feedback, just a low, choppy hiss. I told myself it was the depth, the signal degradation from the concrete and steel overhead. That happens sometimes. Still, it unsettled me more than I'd like to admit. Flashlight in hand, I stepped through the gate and entered Platform 13. The change was immediate. The air felt wrong, not just thick and humid, but still, like even the particles had stopped moving. Dust hovered mid-air, suspended unnaturally. My breath came out visible, even though the temperature wasn't cold. And it was dead silent. I don't mean the kind of quiet you get late at night. I mean silence like the world itself had been muted. The flashlight flickered once. I smacked it against my palm, and the beam steadied, and the beam steadied. The platform itself was warped tiles missing, old advertisement posters from the 70s peeling off the walls. One of them still read "Ride Easy with Warrenton Transit" above a smiling woman in a turtleneck blouse. The smile looked sinister. In the dim light, like she was in on something I wasn't. I moved slowly, noting exposed wiring, collapsed portions of the ceiling, and what looked like old fire damage on the southern wall. Then I noticed something strange. There was a train on the track that should have been impossible. It was a Warrenton Series 500 decommissioned long before I was even born. Rusted, silent, but fully intact. Its doors were shut. No lights were on. The number painted across the side read 213. That number again. I approached slowly. There was something compelling about Eton urge, like I was being pulled forward without choosing to move. My hand reached out and touched the cold, corroded metal of the first car, and the door opened. It hissed mechanically, like it still had power. But there were no cables connecting the train to anything. No power grid, no signal relay, no third rail lift. It shouldn't have been functional at all. I peered inside. The seats were empty, save for one passenger. In the far back of the car sat a figure, facing forward, perfectly still, dressed in black, motionless. Their head was down, like they were asleep or pretending to be. My flashlight dimmed again. Then I saw the reflection in the window. The passenger wasn't alone. Standing directly behind the seated figure was something tall, thin, and featureless. Its form shimmered like heat haze. It didn't seem to move, but somehow, with each blink, it appeared closer to the window, as if it was being drawn forward, or manifesting. I took a step back. The flashlight went dead. For about 10 seconds I was plunged into absolute darkness. And in that darkness I heard something breathing. Not mine. It was heavy, ragged, almost wet, sitting close, right in front of me. The flashlight flickered back to life just long enough for me to see the figure in the window had turned its head. It was looking at me now, and it had no eyes, just a blank stretch of skin. I ran. I don't remember making the climb back up the stairs. I don't remember how I got out of the service corridor. All I recall is bursting out of the entrance onto the empty street above and vomiting onto the pavement. The walkie in my vest crackled to life with a high-pitched whine that made my ears bleed. That was the last time I entered Platform 13. In my report, I wrote up electrical interference, vagrant activity, and structural instability. I never mentioned the train, or the figure, or what I saw in that reflection. I wouldn't be believed, but about 2 months later, a young man was found wandering the Warrenton tunnels near Platform 13. He was barefoot, mumbling incoherently about missing time, the man with no face, and riding forever but never getting off. He had a train ticket in his pocket, dated 1979. It was for train 213. The station has since been resealed, welded shut this time. But sometimes, the footage from Warrenton Central still glitches at exactly 213A.M. And sometimes, when I walk past the old service corridor, I swear I hear the hiss of a train door opening, somewhere deep underground. I was a contractor for the city's infrastructure divisions, specifically, a tunnel inspector. Not sewer pipes or electrical lines, but subway service tunnels, the dead zones under cities that no one remembers building. Between 2014 and 2021, I inspected over 80 miles of New York's undercity. I saw things most people will never understand, but none of it prepared me for Rose Hill Station. Back in 2019, I was assigned to map and assess an abandoned spur off the eastbound Rose Hill platform. Transit records listed it as Tunnel Air Tigablas, Sub 7, decommissioned in 1974 and sealed for public safety only. The door wasn't sealed. It had a peeling red X painted across it, but the latch was already undone when I arrived. No chains, no padlock, just a strange cold leaking from the gap beneath the steel. The station manager gave me a clipboard with old blueprints and refused to come within 10 feet of the tunnel entrance. I remember asking him something like, "Anyone ever been in there recently?" And he just said, flatly, "Not twice." That should have been enough to make me walk. But I didn't, because when you work underground long enough, fear starts to feel like superstition. The dark is just dark. Echoes are just physic. That's what I told myself. I stepped through the door. The temperature dropped immediately. It was the kind of cold that hits the back of your teeth, not your skin. The air was stale, but not musty, just empty. Too still. As I descended, the walls shifted from cement to older brick, then to actual carved stone. It didn't make sense. There was no record of this part of the tunnel being pre-20th century. I made a note of it, kept walking. That's when I saw the tracks. But these weren't modern rails. They were narrow gauge, laid by hand, warped and rusted. The wood ties charred, like they'd been in a fire decades ago. No electricity, no cables, just rails vanishing into blackness. About 100 feet in, I came across a bench, a subway bench, just sitting there in the middle of the tunnel, bolted to nothing, lit by a single flickering lantern mounted above it, and on the bench sat a man in an old conductor's uniform. He wasn't moving, not until I got within 10 feet. Then he turned his head and whispered, "You're on the wrong side of the tracks," and vanished, gone, just gone. No movement, no fade, no puff of dust, just me, the bench, and the lantern. I should have turned around then, but I didn't. My flashlight flickered once, then came back. I kept walking. After maybe 10 more minutes, I heard it, a train whistle, distant, low, almost mournful. It didn't match anything in the city's fleet. I stopped in my tracks, listened again. It was getting louder. Then, around a bend, it appeared. A subway train, but older. Much older, coal black exterior. No numbers, no logos. Lanterns hanging, instead of headlights. Every window blacked out except for the last car, where I saw something I still can't explain myself. I was in that last car, same clothes, same backpack, just staring out, dead-eyed, as the train coasted silently past me, and then it was gone. No wind, no vibration, no screech of brakes, just empty track again. I ran, not fast, just quick enough to not feel like I was standing still. Then I saw something on the ground where the train had passed. My clipboard, the same one I was holding in my hand. I dropped the one I was holding, bent to pick up the one on the tracks. It had different notes, things I hadn't written yet. Hazards I hadn't encountered. Names of people I'd never met. One line near the bottom made my skin crawl. "Don't speak to the girl." Then I heard humming. It echoed faintly from deeper in the tunnel, a childish, off-key tune, the kind you hum when you're afraid of the dark. Then I saw her, a little girl, maybe 7 years old, wearing a dress far too clean for a tunnel like this. She stood just outside the reach of my flashlight, barefoot, face turned down. Her hands were clasped in front of her like she was waiting to be scolded. My first instinct was to call out, but that line on the clipboard, I stayed quiet. The girl looked up, slowly. Her eyes weren't eyes, just two dark, wet holes where light got lost. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She just watched me. Then she said, in a voice that didn't match her size or age, "You heard the train. Now it hears you." And she vanished into the dark. Ran. I don't know how long. I passed the bench again. The lantern was out. The tunnel walls now had something carved into them. Deep gouges, not letters, not symbols, just repeated marks, like something with claws had scraped the stone for years. I turned a corner and stopped dead. The tunnel ended. No gradual slope. No warning. Just open air, like the tracks had been chopped in half. And beyond the edge, Nothinga, black abyss, no echo, no floor, but the rails kept going straight out into the void. And in the distance, across that impossible gap, I saw another platform, another version of me, standing there, staring back. Then I heard the train again. Behind me. I turned, expecting to see lights, but there weren't any. Just sound, just pressure. And that whisper from the conductor echoing up the walls. One way in, no way back. I dropped the clipboard and jumped, not forward, not into the dark. I jumped backward toward the tunnel I'd come from. I woke up on the Rosehill platform. Lying on the tiles. No one around. The service door was sealed shut. A red X, freshly painted. My clipboard was gone, but the floor beside me was wet with a perfect boot print in the middle of it. Mine from a shoe I hadn't worn yet. I used to work late-night maintenance for the city's transit authority at Dole, mostly solitary job filled with fluorescent hums, oil-stained boots, and the occasional rat that darted between the tracks like it knew more than it should. Had been assigned to the older portion of the subway lines 3 and 4, where infrastructure hadn't been updated since the late 60s. Everyone called that part the lower veins. Not officially, of course, but old workers had superstitions about that stretch. Had noises, power dips, even flickering shadows in sealed service tunnels, the usual stuff you hear in places that are older than your parents. I never gave it much thought until the night I was assigned to investigate what dispatch called a pressure anomaly near Riverton Station. Riverton had been closed to the public for decades. It used to connect to low-traffic neighborhoods, but after a partial cave-in back in the 80s, the city just shuttered the whole place. Only maintenance personnel like me ever went down there now. Even then, only when we had no choice. That night, my orders were simple. Check the air pressure levels reported in a short segment between Riverton and an adjoining tunnel to Line 4. It was supposedly a routine inspection, except the anomaly was marked on a map in a stretch that didn't exist. I noticed it immediately. I knew the blueprints. I had walked that segment dozens of times, but this offshoot tunnel, about 50 meters east of the maintenance access ramp, was completely foreign to me. I double-checked the work order printout, that it was listed as Sector 3, External D. Tunnel D. There were only 3 tunnels at Riverton. Thinking it might be a labeling error. I took my equipment, just a toolkit, a flashlight, a walkie, and an old analog air pressure gauge, and descended the long stairwell down to Riverton. That descent always bothered me more than I admitted. The lights buzzed in that slow, unsteady rhythm, the kind of hum that crawls under your skin and latches onto your spine. By the time I reached the Riverton platform, it was near 1:30 a.m. Everything was as dead as expected. Dust hung thick in the air, curling into faint shapes when my breath cut through it. The tiles along the walls were cracked and water-damaged. The third rail was inactive, and the only light came from a few dim, wall-mounted emergency lamps. That's what made what I saw next so much worse. A faint, glow sickly and yellowish from a tunnel to the east, exactly where Tunnel D was marked. There was no entrance there before, none. It was just a sealed concrete wall last time I'd been down, but now there was an arched opening, old and curved, the bricks around the edges darker than the surrounding wall. The glow came from within, not electrical, not natural. It had a slight flicker like gaslight or flame, but it pulsed, almost like it was breathing. I stood still for nearly a minute, waiting for the logical part of my brain to kick in. It didn't. Instead, I took a few steps forward and peered inside. The tunnel was narrow, unlike the others, and lined with bricks that looked older than the rest of the system, definitely not part of the original infrastructure. I radioed in. "This is Carteret Station, Riverton. I've located Tunnel D, but it's not on any physical map." Requesting confirmation, there was no response, just static. I tapped the walkie. "Repeat. Carter reporting. Anyone copy?" Nothing. I should have left. I should have turned around and flagged the site for secondary inspection. Let someone higher up deal with it. But something about that tunnel, it called to me, not audibly, but I felt it, like it was aware I was there. I stepped inside. The air was colder. Not just subway cold, but the kind of cold you feel in a mausoleum. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing old piping, rusted and warped, and names scratched into the bricks. Hundreds of them. Some were clear: Peter, Angie, WM, others were just initials, and others still looked like foreign glyphs. I walked about 30 feet in when I saw it. The hole, a circular pit in the center of the tunnel, about 6 feet wide, lined with that same strange brick. The yellow light came from inside it, shifting and pulsing. I crouched near the edge, careful not to fall in. The pit seemed impossibly deep. My flashlight couldn't reach the bottom. The air that came out of it was warm, almost humid, and it smelled like old copper and wet leaves. I should have left, but when I turned around, the tunnel behind me was gone. The bricks had closed. I spun, panicked, nearly dropping my flashlight. I ran back to the wall, pounding on it with my gloved fists. Nothing, no sound, no give. It was solid brick, but it hadn't been there a minute ago. I turned back to the pit and the glow inside it was now red, deep, pulsating red. The kind of red you see behind your eyelids after looking at something too bright. I heard something from inside, a sound, like a heartbeat. No, multiple heartbeats, layered, fast, irregular, and then whispers, too many voices saying nothing intelligible, but they were wet and close, as if someone was breathing directly into my ear. I staggered back, nearly tripping, and then I heard something that broke me, my own voice, coming from inside the pit. Carter, Carter, help me, Carter, you left me here. You forgot. It wasn't exactly my voice, but close, like someone who had studied me just long enough to mimic it, badly. It started laughing. I turned and ran again, pounding on the wall until my fists were raw. I screamed. I tried the radio again, static. Still, no one. Only the sound of that thing laughing. Until it changed. It started crying. The kind of crying a child makes when they're alone in the dark, and I swear to God, it sounded like my nephew. I hadn't seen Michael in years, but that sob, it matched him, even down to the stuttered inhale between sobs. I turned, frozen between my need to escape and the part of me that knew this wasn't real. It couldn't be, but it knew me. Everything I loved, everything I feared. Something was inside the pit and it was trying to pull me in emotionally before it did physically. And then, a blink later, the wall was gone. Just gone. The tunnel behind me was open again. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I ran all the way back through Riverton Station, up the long stairs, past the flickering emergency lamps, until I slammed out through the access door and collapsed in the corridor above. My radio crackled back to life. Carter, this is dispatch. We lost your signal for about 2 minutes. You okay? 2 minutes. I looked at my watch. I had been down there for 37 minutes. I didn't correct them. I filed the anomaly report, left out most of the truth, claimed structural irregularity and power failure. The next day, I returned with 2 co-workers. The wall at Tunnel D was solid concrete. Again, no opening, no glow, no pit, nothing, except one thing, a single name, freshly scratched into the brick beside the wall. Carter. I put in my resignation a week later. The Riverton anomaly was never spoken of again. But every once in a while, when I pass by that area in a cab or hear the faint rattle of subway cars in the distance, I feel something watching, listening, waiting, because it knows me now. And I think one day, it will call me back.